AI is such a threat, and we're going to be shocked. It's going to be 2026, which it already is, and it's where all our jobs are going to be gone. Instead of saying, here's how you can use AI, we know
Mhm.
you're confused because we're threatening you so much, and potentially, surprisingly, here's potentially how you can thrive in an environment that may have AI as its biggest backdrop.
Mhm.
It's interesting. There was an expression from the chairman of GE,
Mhm.
and back in like the 50s, and he said, "Change before you have to." And I think that's super important with the AI thing. Rather than just be scared of our own shadows on it, let's think of what makes each of us unique as a
Mhm.
human being that can use AI but doesn't have to get used by AI.
Mary, I'm so excited for this conversation because your background really spans so many different areas of wealth management, leadership development, team coaching, and now helping firms through Accelerate Growth Partners build stronger teams and better succession plans. So, really excited to have you on today. I'd love for it to just hear your story a little bit, maybe a short version. I know we talked the other day about, maybe a little bit about your background in financial services and how that made you realize firms needed more support around leadership, communication, and team development.
Sure. Um, I started my career early as a teacher, because I always wanted to be a teacher because I didn't like blood, so therefore I couldn't be a nurse, which were the only two choices at the time. And then became a CPA. Worked with one of the big accounting firms, and actually loved getting promoted, but then eventually kind of realized there were no people; it was just numbers, and that was really hard. So I remember deciding that I thought wealth management would be a good career for me, and going to a recruiter. I think it was a Dean Witter at the time, and I gave him that exact elevator speech. And he leans back and he goes, "Was pretty clear what happened here. You're the case of a square peg in a round hole. You'll fit in the round hole, but you'll never be comfortable." And I had
Mhm.
this light bulb moment, like, that makes sense to me. Like, I wanted to be like do well wherever I was placed, but it wasn't necessarily the best place for me. So wealth management was a great career, best job in the world. During my time, I coached a lot of different colleagues and mentored people through their careers, and helped people decide that wasn't the right career for them or whatever, in addition to running a multi-billion-dollar book of wealth management clients, mostly wealthy individual families. And then it kind of became like, it seemed like it was time to move on from that stage, because I think there's so many trends that aren't being talked about that need to be. So I decided it might be interesting to give it a shot to create some content that could work around some trends that I'm seeing in the industry today. And what is interesting is it doesn't necessarily relate to wealth management, because it relates to any professional field, frankly, whether it's accounting, legal, insurance, any, startup entrepreneur. There's so many things that rhyme, basically. So for example, AI. I just read yet another article that is leaving black and blue marks all over me, because AI is such a threat. And we're going to be shocked. It's going to be 2026, which it already is, and it's where all our jobs are going to be gone. Instead of saying, here's how you can use AI, we
Mhm.
know you're confused because we're threatening you so much, and potentially, surprisingly, here's potentially how you can thrive in an environment that may have AI as its biggest backdrop.
Mhm.
It's interesting. There was an expression from the chairman of GE,
Mhm.
and back in like the 50s, and he said, "Change before you have to." And I think that's super important with the AI thing. Rather than just be scared of our own shadows on it, let's think of what makes each of us unique as a
Mhm.
human being that can use AI but doesn't have to get used by AI. I mean,
Right.
that's a big a very big trend right now, I think.
Yeah.
So the other thing too is like the the training for conferences is expensive. Most firms, because of market concerns and things, really never want to hire an online on-site training.
Mhm.
team that can just deliver the on, on demand. So you're seeing more like lunch and learns, like a branch meeting of maybe 30 people that can have like a hybrid situation where you have a facilitator for the content, but then you get people talking. Because one of the other things that's a big trend is experiential learning, which I certainly didn't experience. This is how I learned. Um, the teacher talked at us, gave us some seat work, gave us some homework, gave us a
Mhm.
test, and we forgot it. It worked, somehow got through the SATs but whatever. The idea being that it wasn't a very effective way to retain the knowledge, but it was an effective way to push a lot of baby boomers through the system, right? So now, if you say, for example, you have a child in kindergarten and they say, Mr. Jones, you should come and see your kid in action. It's not ever a good sign that they want you to actually see your kid behind those two-sided windows. Kind of like in Law and Order, you can look at the in the box and see them interrogating a witness. You go to the kindergarten window and you see, oh, this is why little Johnny needs help here because he doesn't know how to socialize. Well,
Mhm.
basically, if you could do a snapshot of little Johnny's classroom today, surprise, surprise, they recognize that basically they have a very short attention span. Unlike the adults in the world that have very long attention spans, we all have like a goldfish attention span, and you better capture it quickly, right? So,
Mhm.
experiential learning is a technique that recognizes that, especially in open-ended questions, it's not like we could, solve for the square root by solving it in a team and coming up with a bunch of estimates. That's
Mhm.
really when there's a specific answer. But then why do we even need the square root? That's another question. But so let's go to open-ended questions where there could be a lot of different solutions. The perfect way is to give them kind of a theme that they can work with. And this happens in pre-K school classes, it happens in college, and now it's happening in adult training. And so the
Mhm.
idea is here's a theme. Let's bring out some of the questions, but let's have you think of what the questions could look like.
Mhm.
Okay. And then come back in a group of potentially, usually strangers, different ages and stages of the career. And they
Mhm.
all have different viewpoints on how to attack the problem and maybe what some of the potential solutions are. You
Mhm.
walk away with like all kinds of new ideas. I've
Mhm.
gotten pushback from some people saying, well, what's in it for me? Why would I give away my best ideas?
Mhm.
Well, because you're going to get some other good ideas. Maybe you could get that out of it, right? So the idea being that no one's stealing your best thoughts as long as they're offering their own. And you typically walk away with a much richer, denser kind of understanding of what the issues are. So
Mhm.
anything from, for example, hiring and firing. Hiring is really difficult, but you know what's harder than hiring? Yeah, that firing part, right? So the idea being that the techniques that you can use, I actually had to fire somebody recently, and it was like I actually learned techniques about really approaching the topic and the subject with the person in a way that they would understand, they would accept, and we could move forward. In this case, we basically talked about other opportunities this person could take because they've got talents in other areas.
Mhm.
And then effectively, I didn't have to say, but you don't have a lot of talent in this area because it all worked out very calmly, which was such a nice sea change for how firing situations used to be.
Mhm.
So that's one example. But I mean, there's all kinds of personality profiles, learning about intergenerational challenges, because we all talk about each other, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't learn to take the best of each or the best personality types. Guess what? AI can't do that, just as an aside. They'll say, well, you're a Gen X, so this is how you feel. They won't recognize your personal background, what your, particular motivators are, etc. So that's
Mhm.
where the nuances of people dealing with people can make a
Mhm.
difference and bring back to the table where AI can give suggestions of how to implement once we've given them the framework. So
Mhm.
there's communications, like, you know, AI has like one tone, which is always, do you notice? It's always like, well, that's a great idea, Heather. I'm
Mhm.
glad you thought of it. Instead of pushing back maybe when we need it, right? But the communications of how do you make a good first impression before you even open up your mouth? Like
Mhm.
nonverbal communication, communication between team members who know and understand each other, but maybe need to broach like I'm not the best person to do this job. I think you might be kind of conversations, or the hiring, firing, or talking to a client when the stock market's down
Mm-hmm.
and not raising the threat so high that everybody's nervous as can be with the end of it.
Right.
So all of those sorts of things make a big difference. And practice management, like capacity issues, again, kind of having solid conversations with people that you want to work with, but maybe in a different way than they're perceiving it. So how do you have those kind of conversations? So all of that's important. And this is far from finally, but succession planning in all these industries is now a little more complicated because of AI and technology starting to gallop, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think we've traditionally said succession planning is for the old guy, the guy that really we should move him on because we've got the next generations pushing up behind. And so let's figure out how we're going to tell him that maybe he needs to figure out what he's going to be when he grows up, or she, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's awkward and frankly has never traditionally worked unless there's a set retirement date. Most people really don't want to leave for a variety of different reasons. Pride, you know, income, worries about how they'll entertain themselves, all that, okay? But
Mm-hmm.
succession planning is equally important for every generation on the team. Every single person on that team wants to know where they fit in the progression here.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen stories and we've seen anecdotal evidence of the younger generation learning it and leaving because they've given up confidence that the older generation will actually pass the baton. So
Mm-hmm.
all the techniques of succession planning and everybody hearing each other, that's a trend that has to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So there's nothing really to study. There's no tests, but there's really important conversations that have to happen. And
Mm-hmm.
AI will not have those conversations with you. So those are some of the trends I think we've got going.
Yeah. No, I hear, yeah, you made a lot of really good points there. I like to think about AI in a similar way that I try to think about money, right? Like I feel like money is another thing in the world
Hmm.
that can be really scary for
Hmm.
some people, or, it feels like it's out of their control, right?
Yeah.
But when we start to see money as a tool, right,
Mm.
to get what we want in life or to build, to get the career goals, the business goals, all of that, what we want, that's when we start to feel more in control because we're
Hmm.
getting more skilled at utilizing that tool, right? So I think AI is kind of the same thing. Like there's always going to be that both sides, right? There's going to be
Hmm.
the side that sees it because as a scary thing that they don't understand,
Hmm.
right? And then there's going to be the side that's like, oh, rather than letting it, like you said, just like you said, letting it take over, why don't I
Hmm.
learn how to use this powerful tool and then I can be part of that change and like, to drive the change that I want to see in the world.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
I think for anybody with, a more optimistic or, um, a certain type of perspective on life, that they would actually be the ones who are going to be able to utilize this tool the best, which is actually
Hmm.
kind of promising for the human race.
Yeah. It's
You know
it's
what I mean?
interesting. Yeah, it's like I used to always say to clients, like in the wealth management business, like your money can be a tool or a weapon. And I certainly
Yeah.
saw families where money was a weapon,
Yeah.
but the best families that actually survived the challenge of money used it as a tool, right?
Mhm.
I have a very good friend who worked for me before I retired a couple of years ago, who's now just turned 25 years old. He's very wise. Okay. So he's smarter than me in so many different ways. So he brings up to me without even me prompting him about AI. He goes, but didn't they feel that way when the computers were introduced? And
Yeah.
then he says, but how about the internet? Didn't they say the internet was going to take over all our intellectual property? Like we wouldn't need to work anymore because the internet would provide it all. Well, you have to
Mhm.
know how to use it. Going
Mhm.
back to your tool analogy, like it's actually, let's think of it instead of a threat,
Mhm.
which is how everybody's, it's more popular to think of the negative, right? So
Mhm.
everybody's looking at it as a threat,
Mhm.
and you're going to lose your job, and you're not going to be needed anymore, and you're going to sit watching TV all day. I don't know. It's like it's out of control on the negative side, and there's these small voices in the wilderness. And I'd like to be one of them that gets more traction on the idea of how can you prepare yourself
Mhm.
to offer human characteristics that, that basically are going to work with it in an AI world.
Mhm.
Somebody told me the other day, it was good. They said, what you don't understand is that the older generation is complacent about technology because they think they know what they know. My mom, who is very smart, but back in the day, like maybe, 15 years ago or something, she'd say, just fax it to me, honey. I'm like, fax it? But that's where her technology stopped, and she was perfectly happy not knowing about email and texting. And I got to say, sometimes I'm like, workspace, don't make me crazy, but you have to learn it. But there's plenty of seniors in the professions across the board and any of the accounting, legal, anything, right? Insurance, where they're very complacent with their level of knowledge. But if they're going to have an end game of maximizing the value of the practice that they built, they're going to have to wake up and start respecting the next generation because they're going to understand it.
Mhm.
And again, going back to the experiential learning, I had a conversation with some gentlemen from an inner city school system in Cleveland, Ohio, and I said, "What are you doing with AI?" And these were these were two elderly school administrators, like elderly, they're like in their 60s, and one of them looked at me on a Zoom screen and said, "It's not my problem. I'll be dead by then." I'm like, "Were you dying next year? What are you talking about? Like, how can it not be your problem?" So I said, what if we had an exercise with like the kids that ask them what AI is and what it does and what you do better? They're much more savvy about this stuff than you think they are. You're not
Mhm.
savvy at all because you probably stopped a little later than fax machines, but not much later, right?
Right.
So, I think that this open-ended conversation with kids, you might be shocked at what they know, what they've already absorbed in terms of risk, and what they're thinking about.
Mhm.
And that helps you get them as a starting point. So there's too much threat conversation and not enough like we're humans, will make it happen. Don't
Yeah, yeah. I
we'll go
remember
through it.
in our earlier call, you made a really powerful point that if someone truly knows their client, they know their family, their priorities, the real
Mhm.
nuances behind their decisions, and that relationship becomes very hard to replace,
Right.
right? So, it sounds like that's really the part that we should be focused on in terms of our
Mhm.
skill sets as professionals, right? In this new world, which honestly I think is going to be really valuable for a lot of people to, expand that skill set of
Mhm.
relationship development and building. Why do you think that human depth is such a competitive advantage, and how does accelerate growth really, capitalize on that?
Well, it's super important to understand your client family at a deep level, which means understanding all generations, having the right people on your team kind of curated to handle all different aspects of financial life for them. Because you know what? They could make doing a will super easy. They already have templates online, but no family I worked with has a simple will. They don't want to tell you, but once you know them well enough, you understand every family's got like worries in their family dynamic. And
Yeah.
so, or they may have great wealth that they want to make sure they're passing along responsibly with a combination of charity and family members and friends or whatever. There's each unique set. No computer's going to do that for you.
Yeah.
And so it is, I do think that there will be people who can't rise to the occasion.
Mhm.
And that's where they're going to have to recognize I may have built this business, but I've got other people on the team that can develop the relationships that are going to keep this thing going. It's I every time I've ever given a speech, somebody inevitably raises their hand and says, "How do you know so much about your clients? That's really nosy." Like I'm like shocked that you would ask such personal questions. I'm like, um, yeah, I guess it is probably, and well, it's pretty complex, but you might want to write this down in case you forget it. It's 5 words. You start the conversation with, tell me about your family. And you sit back because they want to. They're
Mhm.
interested in themselves. They're worried about aspects of it. And that will come out when you ask them and sit back and let them talk.
Mhm.
Not everybody wants to do that. So they better declare a major in terms of what they're going to offer a team into the future that's going to continue to be valuable. And that I think that's a risk for some people because some people just don't have that in them. and they take a lot of credit for other things that may be replaced by technology. So that's where you could make the team of the future, which is going to be very disciplined in terms of offering different aspects of the needs of a client.
Mhm.
And if you handle wealth management as an example in the depth that it deserves to be, you're going to have a lot of experts on your team, and there's no one AI that's going to do that for you. And
Mhm.
they're not going to remember you the next time they talk to you. So there's that.
Yeah. That is a really, really powerful point. I think we all can try to incorporate into what we do, right?
Yeah.
Every day with our
Mhm.
clients. What are you most focused on right now at Accelerate Growth Partners, in terms of improving or expanding the business over the next year?
Yeah, I mean, starting like a year and a half ago, I focused on content development, which I thought was going to be very important because I wanted to have a body of interactive work that I could actually market. Um, and we've gotten a few clients by now. It's very competitive out there. I don't, for example, there's a lot of conferences and things. I don't know what the calendar schedule is. And inevitably they say, we just filled the agenda like 3 weeks ago, you know? But what's interesting is one of the sponsors that we're working with um, said you did it backwards. You should have started with the speaking engagements and then done the content, which I know darn well, number one, the speaking engagements wouldn't have been as what I want to say today. What
Mm-hmm.
I thought I knew a year and a half ago, I've unlearned much of it and started to relearn it, especially in the face of AI, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's also something that there's opportunities out there to kind of think outside the box in terms of what training should look like
Mm-hmm.
and how it could be delivered. So there's a continuum, for example, between content development, and we have a great content developer. I didn't even know these people existed, but she's very creative, works at a great company, has a backup of all the technology for the pipes of it, completely remote, which is certainly possible through hybrid, which I mentioned before, which is like a facilitator, me or someone else on the team that could be the on-site person that's facilitating what's happening in a distant place. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you get 30 people in a room and you divide them into three tables of 10, and then you kind of lead them through it. And guess what? They lead each other, which I found over and over again is really powerful, and they're much happier, thinking that they are in control of the agenda all the way through the continuum to, being on a stage. But once again, what I used to do and what most people continue to do right now is they say, well, we've given you like, 50 minutes or 90 minutes. So what are your topics going to be? And I used to just talk for that time frame and maybe, obviously leave time for Q&A. Now what we do is we'll introduce a theme, maybe multiple themes, and then we'll make sure everybody's broken into tables and give them open-ended questions to deal with. And the only problem you have in the room is the noise. I had a 2 hour session recently with 70 strangers to each other in the industry, though, but they didn't know each other, all different ages, stages, right? And I thought, 2 hours, are you kidding me? Like, how about those attention spans we all know about, right? At the end, two of the tables of seven came up and asked for an extra hour. They weren't finished.
Wow.
And it was because I wasn't teaching them, I was facilitating them thinking about questions they care about. And,
Mm-hmm.
and most times when people think about training, they think it's a body of knowledge and take a test at the end. That's that old traditional model.
Mm-hmm.
But you walk away learning, and the conversations walking out the door were so powerful. So I was proud that I helped that happen, but
Yeah.
they made it happen.
Mm-hmm.
And which do you think you remember more? Somebody that jabbered at you for like 90 minutes or 90 minutes of deep conversation with strangers that have something new to add to your thought on practice management.
Yeah,
So
that's
that's
way more
been,
memorable and
yeah,
such a
yeah,
such a brilliant strategy also to have them think of.
I know, right?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's simple and it takes a lot of work off of your plate too, to be up there
Well, you got
preparing.
to have it all. There's a
Not
ton
that
of
it's not
work.
work to
Yeah, right.
facilitate. Yeah, exactly.
There's a lot to make sure that we've curated the content enough
Yeah.
that we understand what the questions could be, that we provide the role play, we provide the case studies, we provide the just the topics that
Mhm.
aren't coming up in day to day, but are very, very important when you're managing practice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Got it. No, that's brilliant. Brilliant idea. And so that's what you've been focusing on All right, so you focus on content, now you're focusing on speaking engagements.
Yeah.
What do you think is the biggest thing that you would need to really, or that you want to tackle to really take Accelerate Growth Partners to the next stage of growth?
What we've started to do is because in my career, I've known other coaches or thought leaders or, um, you know, consultants that worked with the industry, and they've got brilliant ideas. We have a communications coach who's like used to be a TV anchor. Okay. So she's got amazing ideas. So the idea is that you were always smarter if we add more
Mm-hmm.
firepower to the question. And and it's been welcomed because a lot of people have been working in silos, very small silos, maybe themselves and an assistant. And that can still continue, but we're allowing everybody's best ideas to come to the front, which to me makes a better end product for the user. So that they have the chance of learning about communications, intergenerational, curating a team so that it's feeding to its strengths, succession planning, financial planning, all the gamut of things that advisors do beyond talking about the stock market and that
Mm-hmm.
accountants do beyond preparing tax returns.
Mm-hmm.
They're lawyers. I mean, there's so many different professions that are craving it. They don't even know because they don't get it yet because they're just taking tests effectively.
Mm-hmm. So you're um, thinking about how to train your team in these skills, in these
Mhm.
really relationship building skills, right? Is
Mhm.
that really what they encompass, or does it go beyond that?
Well, of course, I mean, for example, people that have never taken financial planning seriously. And
Mm-hmm.
estate planning is, I mean, frankly, I didn't talk about your portfolio in the first meeting. We sat and talk about your family. And then if you want to go to like really complex, you go to level 301, which is tell me about your parents. Now you've
Mm-hmm.
got the family, right? But then what happens is that at the end of that first meeting, I would say, with your permission, may I take a look at your wills and your statements?
Mm-hmm.
Because inevitably their wills did not reflect the family I just met. And
Mm-hmm.
if you can watch people lean in, you can actually feel them lean in on the phone. I'm serious. Like you can tell somebody wants to say something that they're not going to say in front of an attorney, but they may say in what they feel like is a private space with us, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, um, so the idea is all of these coaches, we've got a similar approach to it,
Mm-hmm.
and but we bring something unique to the table, and every end product that a sponsor, whether it's a money manager, an insurance company, a wealth management firm, a bank, an accounting firm, a law firm, any of those effective buyers of it. So there's the B2B aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
So the B2B is a sales effort to those buyers who want to co-brand, who want to send a message that we understand the uniqueness of humans and the needs to learn more, which
Mm-hmm.
is it goes beyond relationships. It's subject matter stuff like estate planning, philanthropic planning, just family dynamics issues that crop up with money. Risk is a big deal that people don't pay enough attention to. So
Mm-hmm.
all of those kinds of things that help people feel like they've got more control
Mm-hmm.
over the tool that is their wealth
Yeah. And so
or
you
the
work
tool that
with
is their career.
right.
Yeah.
No, exactly. Yeah. So um that's really powerful what you help people do. Is that a combination? It sounds like you said you definitely work B2B, so that means you're offering your services to their workforce, or is it
Mhm.
just certain individuals in that company? And then you also have work with one-on-one with private clients.
Mhm.
Is that right? It's a combination.
We've done everything from individual team coaching to, the big stage presentation to a bunch of strangers. So the B2B aspect is you've got to have a willing buyer that has the big picture and wants to actually offer something value added to their staff. And their
Mm-hmm.
staff can be broken out by qualifying levels, can
Mm-hmm.
be broken out by regions, can be broken up by people who raise their hand,
Mm-hmm.
that you can sign up and opt in.
Mm-hmm.
So but the interesting challenge has been like selling it to B2B, who are going to be the providers of the service and pay for the service, but the service is going to be B2C.
Mm-hmm.
It has
Right.
to be focused on the end client effectively, which are the people who are going to be facilitating each other's learning.
Right.
by being prompted to topics that matter today and matter to them in building a practice.
Right. And so you primarily work with HR, most likely to build those relationships or no?
Mostly practice management types, you
Mm-hmm.
know. So because the practice management people are the ones that want to again be like co-branded.
Mm-hmm.
Insurance companies, for example, don't want to just be branded as somebody that you come to when you die, you
Mm-hmm.
know. So they'd
Right.
like to say, we actually would like you to stay alive, and here's the quality of life issues that you may want to talk about, you
Mm-hmm.
know. And
Mm-hmm.
that could be really helping healthcare concierge services,
Mm-hmm.
which are part of our wealth management for sure. We
Mm-hmm.
don't often think of it that way, but healthcare management is a big deal for families,
Yeah.
especially when they've got real serious issues. So being one of the cadre that help them, but in a
Mm-hmm.
very kind of specific way, you know?
Yeah. So it sounds like your ideal client really would be like an insurance provider itself that you could partner with
Right.
and
And
offer
they're
kind of
gonna they're
package.
gonna feel good because they're offering something that people want to learn about.
Mm-hmm.
They've heard about it, but they don't even know how to get their arms around it. And what I would do is not me purport to be like the healthcare expert, but find the healthcare experts that can help them understand the specific issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So tell me more about what it is that you offer the individual aside from, just understanding the basics of
Mhm.
how they can use their money more wisely and become more, more empowered by their relationship with money.
Mhm. Well, I mean, everything from understanding the families, getting to know the next generation, because you know what? The doesn't matter how wealthy a client is on their deathbed, they're not asking how much money they had in the bank that day.
Hmm.
They are asking, did I raise responsible adults?
Hmm.
Am I leaving a legacy that I can be proud of?
So
And
end
if
of
I've
life planning.
yeah,
Yeah.
if I've conquered some problems, whether it's addiction issue in a child or some other, psychological issue, did
Hmm.
I do my best?
Hmm.
And I've never met a family that didn't think that that was the priority. And the
Hmm.
money, again, is the tool that can help to make it happen, that brings more options to the table, just gives you more flexibility. We've all said that, right? Money doesn't make you happier, but it certainly opens up your flexibility options, you know? So
Yeah.
all those sorts of things, and what's really behind the fear of how to invest your money when you feel like it's so random. I mean, the news flow every single day forces completely random things to happen to your money. Why should I have anything invested at all? My God, I can't handle this risk. If you
Hmm.
actually identify the risk that the people are willing to take, but
Hmm.
only in a moment of sanity, not when they call in a panic or when you call them to say, I know you're worried. Let's talk about what's going on proactively, which a computer's not going to proactively just knock on your door, right? But
Hmm.
in a moment of sanity, we decided how much risk we could take. And we
Hmm.
do it in a very kind of like very structured way, which is like, the stock market has had a really tough year. You have $100,000 in the market, and at the end of the year, you have nothing. How do you
Hmm.
feel? Okay, at the end of the year, it's been a tough year. You have $90,000. Well, I can handle that. I've got a long-term perspective. Okay. And then you'll say, okay, it's been a very tough year. It's $75,000. And just that little pause says they're not really liking that $75,000 from their 100. So then you say, maybe that makes you feel uncomfortable. Yeah, it does. They need permission to actually bracket their risk level. And
Hmm.
then with the conversation when the market's tanking or when something is upsetting in their family dynamic and what is there enough money for it, is remember in a moment of sanity, we decided how comfortable we were with volatility. And
Hmm.
I am not proud to tell you your portfolio is down 7% this year so far, but it's not down 25 because we never wanted that risk.
Hmm.
You can't hide the truth if it's down, but if you've done your homework by hearing them and understanding them,
Hmm.
then you've protected their portfolio better. And that's the sort of thing more people should think, should really consider.
Hmm.
Not how can I make the most, but how can I, the whole Will Smith thing. I'm more worried about the return of my capital than the return on my capital.
Hmm.
That's serious. And Will Smith knew that, not Will Smith, Will Rogers. Will Rogers knew that like in the turn of the century, into the 20th century, he knew that. And it hasn't changed. People work too hard for what they have. They don't want to lose it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, it sounds like everything you're saying is really standing out to me as all about intergenerational communication,
Hmm.
succession planning for that end of life. And, I think these are really hard questions for people to
Hmm.
even start to think about. So it sounds
Hmm.
like your skill set and your firm's expertise really lies in exactly that, helping to have these really difficult, conversations with people, helping them to think about these really difficult decisions, make these really difficult decisions that they don't want to think about when, they don't want to think
Yeah.
about when they die. And nobody wants to think about that. It's probably one of the most scary topics that we could possibly talk about, right, as human
Yeah.
beings. But it seems like a lot of firms out there know that they have that challenge, that they don't have those skill sets or,
Hmm.
resources to have those
Hmm.
conversations and support their clients with that. So you can kind of come in and partner and help them to solve that problem in such a practical way. So that's such an important, you
Yeah.
know.
You're basically a guide because you're not going to make the decisions for them. But
Mhm.
just like the people, strangers sitting at a table coming up with different ideas of how to solve problems in our everyday world, you're going to give them the ammunition. But I have a funny story. Is at one point a new manager had come into our market, and I was going to have breakfast with him. So I called my best friend who knows everybody, and she knew this guy, and she said, "Here's what you do. Listen to me." I said, "Okay." So the next morning, I go down. We order our coffee and bagels at the diner, and I looked at him and I said, "Joe, tell me about yourself." And I promise you, an hour and 20 minutes later, we get up. I never said another word. And he said, "Mary, I can tell you're very smart. We're going to get along just fine." And I never said another word. And it worked like a charm so many times. People unroll themselves for you if you're
Mhm.
interested.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
they need somebody to understand them so that their family's going to be as safe as we can make them with
Mhm.
money. We
Yeah.
can't protect them against disease, but we can help you with that. We can
Yeah.
give you resources you didn't know existed.
Hmm.
So I mean, I probably arranged 5 different air ambulances for clients around the world where they got very, very ill in like China or believe it or not, Switzerland. They didn't feel safe. And we arranged the air ambulance, had the hair a real ambulance when they landed, took them to the hospital. They knew to call me right away, which is just crazy. But when they thought about their money concerns, then they called me. Like when
Hmm.
they called and asked which car model I liked, we preferred over one or the other. I really didn't have a good answer for that. But the point is, when it related to how money can help your family, we
Hmm.
tried to make that our business. Um,
Yeah.
with investments certainly as a tool in the toolbox, but
Hmm.
all the other things that money can do or not do for your family.
Mm. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing all of these insights. I'm sad that our time is coming close to an end now. What's one piece of advice that you would share with corporate training companies that are new to the industry, to the industry, or just new in their offering, developing and growing, and some of the insights that you've learned over, your past year?
I think the biggest thing I've learned is that the users of the training can help train each other. And
Mm-hmm.
that's a positive. That's not me being lazy. That's me facilitating conversations that get those bigger conversations started.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like I gave the example earlier about children at a school. If there's a problem, why can't you sit the kids down and have them start to think through solutions?
Mm-hmm.
So we're not that much different from children, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, one day I work with an inner city school and they everybody came in, the teachers and the kids, everybody came into school one day and they said, "They're not going to have school today. We're going to design a new playground." And so they had the math, you had the math track and you were going to like do the math for the playground. These are little kids too, like kindergarten through third grade. You're going to do the history, you're going to do the art, you're going to do the story, the whole thing. And they designed the craziest playground you've ever seen. But I loved one of the kids at the end, they did a video of the kids playing and kind of really practicing with playgrounds you've never seen before like this, right? Like Dr. Seuss playground. And the
Mhm.
one kid goes, "Yeah, I was really looking forward to a lazy river." So everybody wants more than they can get. But but the point is they gave those kids a choice and they came back with something unique that they adore. And they all learned something about managing a project. So
Mhm.
we need to give everybody we're training
Mhm.
the power to make some of their own choices with colleagues that they know and trust.
Yeah, that's really powerful advice. Thank you. And so we're here again with Mary Deatherage. How do you pronounce your last
Yeah,
name? Deatherage.
I know.
That's such a pertinent last name.
Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah,
Industry.
Death and Rage. It's British. Anyway, so it's Deathridge, like
Deathridge.
Death
Okay.
Ridge.
Mary
Yeah.
Deathridge.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I'll spell it though, so people can find you.
Yeah.
Deatherage. They can find you on LinkedIn. They can go to your website, Accelerate Growth Partners, Accelerate with a
Mhm.
Celerate growthpartners.com. Anywhere else that they can find you? Any last things you want to share with our audience?
Nope. I think this has been fun. Thank you for asking me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for coming. This has been a really fascinating conversation. Honestly, I've never met somebody who's so skilled and practiced at having, conversations about this sorts of end of life planning as you are. And again, I think it's everybody needs to be having these conversations. Everybody needs to be thinking about this. So thank you for inspiring, insights and curiosity into making that plan for ourselves and our families.
Awesome. Thank you for asking me.
All right. Well, I hope to have you back again soon, and we'll take care.